Welcome everybody. We are in our special business meeting of the District of Squamish for Tuesday, December 12th. Halfum Swallowum, Peace Selectama, Klasquehomish, Oemayo, which means welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There's an agenda in front of council. I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Councillor Pryor, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Blackman-Wolf sends his regrets. He was not feeling well, and so after our meetings this afternoon he went home, but I'm sure he will be keeping apprised because this is such an important community issue, and this is just the beginning of the next phase of the engagement. But before we get to the OCP, we just have a little housekeeping to do. So first up on the agenda is item 3.1, the dissolution of the company formerly known as the Squamish Oceanfront Development Corporation, SODC DBA Inc. 685492.
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman. My name is Christine Matthews. I'm the CFO for the district. And beside me is Matthew Hartney. He's from Core Bay Professional Accounting Services Ltd. Close enough. I'm going to hand it right over to Matthew, who's in the district right now providing some services to us for year-end and also is helping us wind up, yay, company 06859492.
Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this report and what's in front of you from council is to dissolve, put forward a motion requesting the company to dissolve, SODC. So what would be happening today is recapping, I think, what started back in 2005 in the history, that if I have the right understanding. Given that the purpose for the corporation to exist was to transfer and do a land deal, which took place in 2016, now that that's been finalized, we have a dividend to record back to the district and to settle the remaining assets and liabilities, which is a nominal amount, a GST return that was outstanding from 2016. Those funds have now been received into SODC Bank. And so coming out of this today, then the corporation itself, those directors will meet and they would pass a dissolution notice to file and complete the corporation and wind it up, including closing the bank account and completing any other last filings that need to be done. For nil filings for 2017, the financial statements would include an audit, and the consolidation into the district financial statements would be its final year in 2017.
Thank you. Council, any questions about this? I don't.
No.
Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, thanks. So that's cutting all ties.
Mayor, yeah, this SODC corporation will no longer exist as a legal entity, and
Yes.
So no partnership, joint, blah, 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 or anything.
Mayor, if I may clarify, you'll see the one thing that there are some things that would have to remain, for example, the records. So what will be happening is all records related to the corporation will be remaining with the District of Squamish.
That's good. Okay.
Ms. Glenday.
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman, Linda Glenday, CAO here at the district. The limited partnership that still exists with the developer of the oceanfront with the district is now in the Squamish Sustainability Corporation. So that was transferred at the time of the sale of the oceanfront lands. So that limited partnership still exists.
Is there any financial things in that limited partnership?
Mayor Heinzman, through you know, there's no financial implication of that partnership. It's a limited partnership with.
Councillor Kent.
You said there was some outstanding funds, some GST that was at the end of the closure. Outstanding? Did that fall on our side of the table or on theirs?
It was a GST return, a check received from Canada Revenue Agency, and that was one of the main things why this hasn't been done yet, is my understanding. And those funds were received in October.
Okay.
They're in the November bank statement for a total of $56,000 and change.
Thank you. I see no further questions from council. I'm looking for a motion as presented on the report. I will just read it off so everyone hears it. That the District of Squamish is the sole shareholder of the company formerly known as the Squamish Oceanfront Development Corporation, Inc., DBA number 06859492. The company authorizes the company to apply to voluntarily dissolve without liquidation under Division 2 of Part 10 of the Business Corporations Act, SCB 202, Section 57, and that the corporate officer be authorized to execute unanimous shareholder resolution on behalf of the District of Squamish and that the District of Squamish is named as having custody of the dissolved company's records. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Kent. Any more discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on in the agenda. That was just a warm-up. This is the main attraction. It is the presentation of the official community plan bylaw, number 2500-2017. After it is presented from staff, council can consider giving it first reading. And just to frame this for everyone here, this is just the presentation of the draft bylaw. Once first reading is adopted, essentially it kicks off a whole other public engagement component to the OCP. So this is just the first sort of look at it. Staff is going to present to us. Council may have some questions, but fundamentally this is the beginning of the engagement process. And following the meeting, there will be a public information meeting where people will be around to ask. You can ask questions or make comments or provide feedback or doodle, whatever you'd like to do. But this is the beginning of the next round of the process. So I'm going to pass it over to Matt and Sarah and Jonas, and I just want to acknowledge that Matt and Sarah have been working on this project. They were seconded to do this project almost 2 years ago. And we took a different approach when we decided to do the OCP. Often municipalities, because their capacity in their planning department isn't such, that they often hire consultants to do this type of work. We took a very different approach. We thought the best people to actually be the authors based on community input and community feedback are the people who live here and our own planners. So we actually seconded our own planners to lead the process and shepherd it along for the last year and a half, almost 2 years. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt and Sarah and Jonas.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Hello, Council, members of the community, and those that are joining us from home or online. My name is Sarah McJanet. I'm a community planner with the district. Matt Gunn to my left. And tonight it is with great pride in the community that we present a full draft of the official community plan for consideration at first reading. Tonight, Matt and I are going to provide a holistic, high-level overview of key aspects of the plan to give you a flavor of its breadth and contents. And then we'll welcome comments and questions of council at the end of the presentation as council considers recommendation for first reading, and then as the mayor pointed out, we'll be around after the session to speak with you casually, informally within the lobby here. So this is a Made in Squamish plan, and it does represent the cumulative efforts and extensive contributions of the community through the 2-year Squamish 2040 engagement process. The plan, the update was really guided and enriched by everyone in the community, so the participation of residents, landowners, local businesses, associations, and service organizations, our advisory committee, which I'll speak to in a moment, all levels of government, agencies and ministries. We have also worked with Squamish Nation leadership and staff who have provided pivotal guidance to us in plan development as we try and forge new pathways with the nation to advance reconciliation in Squamish. And through this process, we really did see unparalleled participation, and it was so exciting. We thank and recognize Modus Planning, who provided expertise and jointly helped us deliver some really creative and impactful engagement. And we also tested some new engagement activities. We ate a lot of pizza, and we made a nerdy planning video, and we had a lot of fun along the way. Squamish is absolutely dynamic and passionate, deeply caring and engaged, and we are really poised to address collaboratively challenges of our time and new opportunities. This also describes a group of local residents who helped us shepherd the project along the way. So we worked with a community advisory committee, and we wanted to give acknowledgement and special thanks specifically to Lisa Ames, Deanna Bell, Christina Bergen, Bill Kavanaugh, Karen Cook, Gary Fitzpatrick, Christine Good, John Hawkins, Murray Journay, Darcy McNeil, Grant McRadu, Sally Rudd, and Mr. Torrin Savoard. There's also many municipal staff and community members, staff and consultants that assisted us with preparing the OCP all the way back in the beginning with background documents, technical papers, development guidelines, and policy briefings that led us up to the discussion draft and then this final draft plan. We've also worked with Dr. Ian Pickett and Benjamin Hamilton of Quest University, Canada, to integrate climate adaptation planning and policy inputs. We worked with our design panel, advisory design panel, as well as local qualified environmental professionals on development permit area guidelines. And also there were a lot of collaborations with Vancouver Coastal Health, community organizations and researchers, as well as School District 48, who have been part of the plan development. And we've used a lot of metaphors for this plan, but probably the best one has been really describing the plan as a bit of a tapestry. We've been trying to weave together many threads to integrate the diverse interests, needs, and priorities into a greater whole. A long acknowledgement statement, but important to recognize how we got here and the contributions. So as a recap, our 4-phase update process began in 2016 in January with visioning and big ideas, from which we summarized and solicited feedback on emerging directions for the plan before we embarked on drafting and reviewing the plan in phase 3. And our work together is not done. We are entering phase 4 of the OCP update process, which is intended to finalize and approve the plan. So through phase 4, we will be taking in feedback from the community and from council, from governments, agencies, and partners to make sure that we've gotten it right. Matt's going to speak a little bit more about this in a couple moments. Before getting into the plan, we did want to emphasize the engagement activities and the level of public involvement we've seen through the process. This is to give you a flavor, and we hope that you've been part of at least some of these activities. So in phase 1, we started with stakeholder interviews. We launched our first online questionnaire. We had a really big public visioning event. We also did a staff with council, a joint World Cafe youth workshop at the high school. We engaged internally with district staff through various departments. We hosted a Totem Hall informal event with members of the Squamish Nation. And then we've also used all of available channels to do outreach, so through the web, through social media, through the paper, posters and postcards. We also hired early on some youth project ambassadors that helped us work to get the word out around the plan at the very beginning, and then the Community Advisory Committee, which I mentioned. As we moved into phase 2, we asked the community to host kitchen table pizza parties to review and discuss early discussion guides that were focused on key policy areas. Again, we solicited more feedback through online questionnaires. We hosted a big policy workshop, and again, did more outreach through those channels. Into phase 3, following the release of a discussion draft, we hosted a very well-attended open house at Brennan Park. Armed with a 12-page executive summary, we also did over 18 neighborhood pop-ups throughout the community. We received over 500 responses to our third online questionnaire. Did more youth outreach and produced an OCP video, as I mentioned, to bring more voices into the process. And then along the way, we've been hosting additional stakeholder sessions, agency meetings, and working with the nation. So now in phase 4, as we initiate this final phase, we've launched the complete draft on our website as of December 1. We will be doing more outreach through community pop-ups into the new year. And as the mayor mentioned, after the session tonight, we'll be around. We invite you to stay with us and chat about and explore the plan. And as we move through phase 4, opportunity for comment on the plan is being driven through our website. So we will ask you to check us out at squamish.ca/OCP. Comments received on the plan are part of the public record, and they will be brought forward for the public hearings in 2018 following a second hearing. We don't have a date solidified for that yet, but there's lots more opportunity for feedback. So, on to the plan itself. It is really hard to do a full recap of the plan without getting super deep into the trees. So as I said, we're just going to talk high level about the vision, goals, and some of the key objectives and plan policy directions. Matt is also going to provide a little focus on growth management. So keep in mind, this is our highest level overall plan. It does attempt to reflect our community values and priorities as we grow and develop over the next 25 years. It is a living plan. It does get amended from time to time, and also on a 5-year cycle where we review it more comprehensively. It is an important guide for the municipality and our council, and informs decisions on planning, how we manage land use, community services, resourcing, servicing, capital projects, and development. We implement the OCP through strategic planning, through our budget decisions, actions, and through the partnerships that we forge, and through monitoring and tracking our progress. So big picture, we do have an updated vision for Squamish in 2040. The vision statement reads, in 2040, Squamish is a vibrant, inclusive, connected coastal mountain community with a big heart and a small town spirit. At nature's doorstep, Squamish is a leader and steward, sustaining ecological and human health while supporting resilient neighborhoods and a thriving, diverse economy for all. So the plan also expresses specific goals that to achieve and realize our shared vision. The goals that you see here, the 5 goals, emerged through community visioning conversations. So those goals are resilient, livable, healthy, connected, and engaged. Because these broad goals are multifaceted and they intersect, they really presented us with a compelling way to try and frame the plan and make it relevant and more tangible for the community. So all of the objectives and the policies within the plan present specific means and preferred directions to try and achieve these goals. In phase 3, we heard very high level of positive support for the vision and the goals. So we've moved ahead with them and invite you to continue to comment on them. In terms of the plan objectives and policies, of which there are many in the official community plan, we've framed them as follows. So the objectives that we've highlighted in the plan are really statements of intent or means to achieve a goal or a desired end result. And policies are specific statements that represent a preferred course of action to contribute towards achieving the goals and objectives. In the plan, you'll see policy directions that may be presented more as requirements, and they might more closely be within the district's full jurisdiction and control in certain areas. We also present lots of advocacy and partnership policies that highlight how we'd like to work with the community in future. So we're going to go through the 5 goals and some of the objective and policy highlights. So bear with us as we go through those to give you a flavor.
Thank you, Sarah. So the first goal we're going to talk to is resiliency or resilient. And so before we start into that, I just want to talk a little bit about what that meant to us as we were drafting this. And really resilient means an ability to recover from difficult situations. So being able to lead on climate change mitigation, adapt to the effects of climate change, prepare to be self-reliant in the event of an emergency or hazards, to maintain a strong local economy, and to sustain long-term social, economic, and environmental health. And how does our plan achieve that? There's a number of ways. We want to demonstrate energy leadership through efficiency, reduction of fossil fuels, renewable energy in our buildings, vehicles, and infrastructure. We have policies to encourage and innovate development, or to encourage innovative development, to conserve and recycle energy, water, and materials. We want to reduce single occupancy vehicle use, support the transition away from fossil fuels, prepare for the projected impacts of climate change, which includes increased intensity and duration of precipitation events and sea level rise, and we want to manage risks associated with natural hazards and reduce community vulnerability. And partly that involves implementation of our integrated flood hazard management plan through controlled densification areas and floodway DPAs. We want to build capacity for emergency preparedness or response and disaster recovery, support diversification and a sustainable economic growth, and increase local job opportunities.
Great. The second major plan goal is livability or livable. And in terms of what that means for Squamish, a lot of this focused around making sure that we have the things necessary for citizens to live well in Squamish. That development is sustainable over time and well managed and financed to ensure adequate services and facilities to meet community needs as we grow. That we grow in a way that is smart and doesn't compromise natural areas and ecosystem assets and services, and that we have recreation, we maintain recreation assets on which we depend and that allows tourism to thrive, that we have well-paying jobs that are available balanced with affordable housing solutions and options, and that parks and our outdoor recreation assets are enhanced and sustainably funded, and that there are also other arts, culture, and recreation and learning opportunities available. So in terms of how the plan proposes to achieve livable and direct us towards livability, the plan speaks to phasing growth for efficient land use and cost-effective infrastructure. There's a really strong focus around promoting compact, complete community. We've introduced a growth management boundary to highlight where we're going to focus growth and infill in the near term and where long-term growth may be accommodated. And we also support in the plan mixed-use neighborhoods and nodes, making room for complementary uses that support complete neighborhoods. And so there's services and work opportunities in proximity to where we live. A focus around increasing local employment and job participation, preserving employment lands so that we don't lose opportunity for industry and commerce. And also a focus around affordable housing options across the continuum for all ages and incomes, ensuring quality, affordable, accessible childcare and early learning opportunities, as well as maintaining water quality, improving our airshed quality and how we manage waste, and also enhancing the creative sector and participation in the arts. The third goal is healthy, and so by this we're taking a very much a holistic view of health. It's not just the absence of disease, it's about ecological and human health, the physical, the social, emotional aspects of our well-being. Healthy communities are ones in which all citizens are supported and enabled to thrive, so we're meeting basic needs, nutrition, attainable and appropriate housing, that people have sufficient income and a living wage. Personal safety is accounted for, as well as opportunities for learning and development. So this goal really recognizes the links between how we plan a community and our health outcomes, and trying to create healthy choices for members of the community through healthier built environment, land use mix, good transportation access, active modes of transportation, as well as the social infrastructure and inclusion, access to nature, all those good things. And there's also a special focus around equity in the plan to recognize and consider the needs, especially of our most vulnerable citizens. So in the plan, there's a strong focus around preserving and protecting our natural environment and ecological function and biodiversity, protecting environmentally sensitive areas, supporting and prioritizing active transportation through neighborhood and development design, and investing in active transportation, expanding our network of accessible parks, recreation, and play spaces, enhancing our local food system in terms of agricultural lands, as well as the diversity and distribution of food assets within our neighborhoods. A focus on universally accessible and age-friendly housing, supporting early childhood development initiatives, working with our early learning partners in the school district, and considering the health impacts of our decisions. The fourth goal is connected, and so by connected, we are talking about how Squamish citizens feel connected and welcomed in the community, how easy it is to get around. People have connections to their neighborhoods, to each other within the region and beyond. People know their neighbors. Neighborhoods are connected and through transit and shared roadways. We have efficient options for regional travel, and we can reduce our reliance on cars. There are community gathering spaces that encourage social connections, and that technology and how we innovate can continue to support us through economic growth and diversification. So within the plan, you'll see objectives and policies that relate to enhancing our transportation network, improving our roads, trails, bikeways, and sidewalk infrastructure, increasing transit service frequency and access, better integrating land use and transportation decisions, and planning for growth in terms of regional transportation, and especially maintaining intermodal connections for employment and industrial lands and activities, social connections and neighborhood design, and improving information access.
Our fifth and final goal is engaged, and this is about resident involvement in community and civic life, participating in local decision making, collaborating in meaningful opportunities for involvement, a culture of mutual understanding and respect, continuing effort on reconciliation with First Nations, nurturing opportunities for artistic, cultural, and political expression, and district leadership in transparent and accessible government. We've got a range of policies and objectives that address these. The plan identifies policies to ensure residents and affected stakeholders have meaningful opportunities to engage in community decision making. It speaks to improving community access to information and data, sustainable management of public assets to meet community needs and goals, annual reporting regarding progress on priority policies, partnerships that support reconciliation with partnerships and reconciliation with First Nations, and enhancements to the community's cultural capital. So that's a summary of our goals of the plan. We're not going to delve too deeply into any of the specific policy areas, but the one that we do want to talk to briefly is growth management, because it has been a fairly significant topic in the discussion of the OCP over the last 2 years. And we have visited this topic with council a number of times in the past, and so this discussion is really picking up from there to show where we've come from the discussion draft to now. So to begin, we'll speak a bit about the urban containment boundary, which previously known as the urban containment boundary has been renamed to a growth management boundary, and we've changed the focus essentially of what that is intending to do. It has been reduced in size, tightened up, and now is focused on the area that's intended for residential development and associated commercial, industrial, and institutional land uses until substantial completion of infill development has occurred. As it's been tightened up, it has now excluded the future residential neighborhoods, which are now outside the growth management boundary. And although it's the focus for the most industrial and commercial, there are a number of land uses that are supported outside of the growth management boundary, and those are significant employment generating activities, industrial uses with minimal servicing, recreation tourism, and airport development. We've clarified some of the items. Substantial completion has gone through some iterations, and currently the definition of substantial completion is that once either of the following have occurred: the district population has reached 34,000, or construction has been completed for 75% of the development potential established under sub-area plans, the maximum densities enabled under existing zoning, and floor area ratios identified in downtown land use designations. In addition, we have policy that speaks to limited development, which may be considered in future residential neighborhood parcels located adjacent to existing developed neighborhoods once the district's population has reached 22,500, provided that the development proposes extraordinary community benefits and that council has adopted a list of defined policy precursors. And finally, we have some policy which supports a government-to-government process for changes in the growth management boundary. This is intended to address proposals from First Nations development on fee simple lands that have been acquired through accommodation agreements.
Great, thanks Matt. The final part of the plan that you will see is a chapter on OCP implementation, which is really important to the success of the plan. So we've tried to articulate and frame the connection between the official community plan and the district's strategic planning that's developed by council for every term, the organization's annual action planning, budgeting, and annual reporting. So it's really important for us to monitor our performance. It's a continuous process that allows us to collectively track our progress using a set of defined indicators that are tied to specific plan goals. And this is really important for shared accountability, transparency, and our decision making. And it's something that will need to be resourced upon plan adoption. There's also a responsibility for us in the district to share responsibility and capacity for community monitoring. We recognize there are a lot of organizations such as the Squamish Community Foundation that does the Vital Signs report to augment our monitoring within the community as we go. In the plan, you will find indicators. We've started with a proposal of 30 indicators, considered kind of a modest but achievable number to track over time that are tied to specific objectives and targets where we've articulated those in the plan. And those indicators have been selected based on their relevancy, the availability of data, accuracy, and reliability for measurement over time. And some indicators we will be able to report on annually, while some will be reported more on the sort of the 5-year cycle with the census. And so there's an opportunity for you to have a look at the different indicators and let us know whether we've selected the indicators that are most relevant for the community to track. We also wanted to highlight that on December 1, we also released a land use map portal on our website. So this is an interactive tool available to you, and we want to thank Dan Griffin with our GIS guy that helped us put this together. So this is a portal that allows you to see and look at the proposed official community plan land use designations as shown on Schedule B and compare against existing land use designations in our current OCP. So you can click on different land use parcels within the community, highlight what or understand what the proposed land use is designated. And you can also leave comments that become part of the public record and let us know what you think about those land use designations. So you can access the land use portal at www.squamish.ca/OCP.
So as was discussed when we began this meeting, this is the start of the adoption process, but we do intend to carry out a public engagement process over the readings and leading up to the public hearing. So we are very interested in public input and feedback coming forward through the next several months. Our intention is to encourage feedback to come in through our online comment form. We want everything to be collected so that it is put into the public record and comes forward at the public hearing. And so we're really going to encourage people to take a look online and to use that comment form. Of course, we will be available for other forms of feedback if people are looking to use other methods to provide feedback, but that is our hope, is to encourage the use of that feedback form. I wanted to highlight the feedback we've received since putting out the draft on December 1st. There have been a few submissions. We had one emailed submission about the growth management policy, and it was encouraging council to consider adopting a more flexible approach regarding extraordinary community benefit applications. We did receive a letter that was interested in examining land use designations in the Finch Road area and proposing some different land use designations than are in the current draft. And then we had 3 online submissions referencing the depiction of First Nations land on our mapping, some suggested greenways to include in our land use mapping, and then there was a fairly comprehensive comment that identified a number of items that could potentially be changed throughout our map schedules. So we're really interested in continuing to have the public involved and to provide feedback. And this tool that Sarah mentioned online, the mapping tool, is a great way to interact with the document and give us some feedback. And as this is part of a process where the document is going to evolve over the readings and leading up to public hearing, we've already identified and knew that there were some items that were going to go through some changes even between this reading and the next reading, and I wanted to highlight some of those. Before the second reading, we anticipate integrating input from the Squamish Nation. We are interested in engaging with them over joint planning processes that would relate to lands outside the growth management boundary, so we anticipate some changes to our policies based on that. We also are anticipating some refinement to our development permit areas for environmentally sensitive areas and our form and character development permit areas. These development permit areas have been drafted in the later part of the OCP process and have come out to the public with the most recent draft. We've got an engagement activity at the end of this week on Friday afternoon at Municipal Hall, which we're encouraging people to come to, and so feedback from that will inform changes to the DPAs. We also anticipate some updates to the regional context statement, which is a bridge between our document and the regional plan for the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District. That's a work in progress, and we do expect some minor revisions there. That document will then be submitted to the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District following second reading and is a precursor to adoption of the OCP. And then finally, we expect changes or anticipate changes will be made to the OCP based on the feedback we receive from the public at events like this, through the online forum, and from second reading and further inputs. As has been discussed a few times, this is the intention of this meeting right now is really to present this to the public and to council, and we anticipate a discussion with council and questions from council following this meeting. We ask that any of the public members of the public who have questions or comments and want to speak about items related to the OCP hold those questions and comments until the conclusion of this part of the meeting, at which point Sarah and I and some of the other staff that have been involved in the plan process will be manning the tables over here where we have our goal sheet set up, and will be available for discussion and one-on-one conversation so that we can delve into your questions in more detail and understand where it is that you're coming from. But we do ask that you hold those questions and comments for the end of the meeting. And then, last one, yeah. And our recommendation as staff council is that the following resolution be approved, that the District of Squamish give first reading to the District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw number 2500/2017.
Thank Hans. Thank you. Thanks very much, Matt and Sarah. So this is an opportunity for council to ask some questions. There's going to be a whole public information session that you can ask questions directly of staff, of council, provide feedback. But we want to make sure that those are really deliberative and done with the maps in front of you and all that sort of thing. So there's going to be lots of opportunity for public feedback. We're not necessarily going to just open the floor up in the meeting per se, but this is the beginning of the next phase of the public engagement. So there's lots of opportunity for input and questions answered and that type of thing. But we're going to do it outside of the actual public meeting so you can have those questions. I saw a hand over here. No, Councillor Pryor.
We are not allowed to one question.
I'm going to go to council for questions.
Well, just for clarity, we're going to do first reading, and I have a few questions. And then the public's going to come over and ask their questions over there. We won't hear their questions. So will that be in future engagement where we get to hear their questions, where they get to ask council?
Yeah, that's a great question, because certainly we want to make sure that you're aware of the discussion that's going on. And the intention is that we're going to use a few different tools. One of the main ones we'd like to use is the online feedback forum, but certainly events like this, and we're also doing pop-ups where we're getting input. And so one of the commitments that Sarah and I can make is that we're going to do a good job of summarizing all of the commentary that we get on a regular basis, just as I did. We haven't had a lot of comments to date, but we will continue at each successive meeting with council to provide you with a comprehensive review of the input that's come in. And the idea being that, you know, if we can collect it all and provide it, then everybody can hear everything that comes in and get a fair understanding of all the feedback that's coming in from the
So,
public.
but the people that want to get their points across to us will do that separately?
Well, ideally, the input will go into through the process that we've set up, whether it's talking to us or into the online website feedback forum, that will become part of the public record and presented to council as part of the public hearing report.
Okay.
And a lot of that feedback will come back prior to second reading as well.
Yes.
And it's, the benefit of doing it in written form is that it's very tangible. It's in written form, and it's part of the public record in
So-
future public records as well.
Exactly.
So, and then I'll just ask a couple questions. I have a few here, but it's a living plan. Can you describe that?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Mayor, through you to council and to the community, as a living plan, it means that the OCP is sort of a snapshot of the community in time, but is looking forward into 2040 and trying to respond to the major plan drivers and challenges and opportunities in the community. But through time, the official community plan can be amended to adjust and course correct as we go. So there is a formal process to go through official community plan amendments, and typically we see those periodically, but essentially that's what we mean by a living plan.
Nobody could hear me. Okay. Well, I don't want to get into too many questions at this point, but you know, we have had a few letters like you mentioned. So, I mean, I'm curious as to where we'll go with that, but it might not be tonight that is best for that. And then in some of the neighborhoods,
I think that's worth following up on that question.
oh,
So I'll ask staff to maybe speak to that. So how, we've discussed that information, feedback, comments are going to be provided. How may they affect first draft and second, between first draft and second draft?
Yeah.
yeah, that's good, that's what I want to know.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I guess we should maybe delve into that just a little bit. So because it does seem like there's some uncertainty about this. I want to be clear that at this point we are here looking for any input or feedback or commentary from council. So if you have any questions or anything you want to talk about, please feel free. This is the opportunity to talk about it. We can continue to talk about it over time, but we're all ears right now and happy to chat. Comments that come from the public, our intention is to take them and then try to address them in the OCP as we move forward. So with the development permit areas being fairly new to the community, we anticipate a fair bit of input, and Sarah and I will review and do our best to accommodate and make amendments to the plan as possible. And then when we come back to council, we'll be able to explain what the comments were and what changes were made to the plan based on that commentary. But certainly if there are any questions or concerns that council has, we'd love to talk about them now.
Oh,
And just a way to frame it is, first reading of any bylaw is the introduction of the bylaw. Here's sort of the last draft. And then public comment, public feedback, council comment comes in, it gets deliberated on, And then some decisions may have to come between first and second reading in terms of, do we change direction here, do we add this, or do we change this? So it's meant to be, it's meant as a tool to say, here's the bylaw, this is your first version to be able to comment on, we want your comments, we want your engagement on this.
Okay, well, I've got two.
Okay.
I'll go one now and then give it back to the floor. With the containment boundary, and, you know, we've shrunk that containment boundary down, and, you know, it's got some effects to it. There's some kickback, and when we did the growth management plan in 2005 or whenever the last one was done, we kind of gave landowners some timelines and some population caps. So we've changed that, and I was on the council that forced that through to keep everybody to that. And now we've changed that, so I feel a bit like we made a deal with someone and now we've changed it, and we've pushed them back aside.
So maybe just clarify, because we don't have a growth management boundary currently, so that's a new concept in terms of, so maybe just speak to that, because we don't currently have a growth management boundary. We used other mechanisms to focus development, but maybe just speak to that.
Yeah, and I think your question is a really appropriate one at this time, because growth management is one of the crux issues, and it's certainly going to be one of the ones that people are going to want to talk about. So I think it's healthy to have a good, robust discussion around this. So you're right, the growth management boundary is a new tool that's been added into the policy framework, and it follows on discussion that we've had as staff and council. The intention of the suite of tools that we have is really to continue what the previous OCP has been trying to do, which is to focus our development on our infill areas. And so when the last OCP was drafted, the policy was set up so that it would really focus on strong infill. And now moving forward, as part of this OCP process, we did analysis to look at what capacity do we have remaining. And from that, there's a lot of development capacity within our lands that are considered infill areas. And so one of the things that we are trying to do in this document is to say, let's make sure that we focus on those infill lands before going into some of these further lands, which we are now designating the future residential neighborhood lands. However, I think one of the points that is worth talking about that we have discussed and we'll bring back up is that there has been an interest from council to be able to consider if some proposal came along that had some extraordinary benefits. Quest is one that is often referenced as having been a particularly important application that hadn't been considered. And so while we are making stronger growth management policies to try and continue our focus on infill development, we are setting up policy to provide council with the option of adopting rezonings and development applications that are outside of those growth management policies if they come with a set of extraordinary benefits to the community. And I think that's the balance that we've tried to strike between what you've been speaking to, which is, you know, we've gone for infill and there was discussion around having some opportunity beyond a certain population threshold. And our analysis, which indicates there is still a lot of opportunity for infill and a desire, which I think, you know, we heard in some of the discussions with council that there is strong desire to continue with that infill. So the balance is to strengthen some of these tools, but to have this extraordinary benefits opportunity within the policy framework.
And what about the lands that were given the 2,200 cap that are now outside the boundary though?
Yeah.
I mean,
So those.
So those have to have the extraordinary benefit, and then you list a bunch of criteria that they have to follow that we may not get to for years.
Yeah. So and these are great questions, because really we're going to end up talking about how strong do we want our growth management policy to be versus how much flexibility is council interested in having? And that's the question. It's one of the core questions that is worth talking about now. And for council, if council has direction as to differences between what is presented and what they'd like to see, then this is a great time to talk about that. And so, yeah, so the threshold, not a cap, but the threshold for 2 significant parcels was 22,500. And based on the analysis, there is capacity for significant more infill development. So in this document, that threshold has been raised from 22,500 to 34,000 and expanded to more properties. So it's become a higher threshold and a more expansive threshold, which does then, for those properties that were interested in developing after 22,500, they now have had, it's pushed out their development window. So that does delay development on those parcels with the intention of focusing growth where there is still existing capacity.
I understand that, but what about when some benefits have been used on the land and the property was expecting to be developed, or portions of it be developed at 22.5, and so the landowners given the community the use of the land as an extraordinary benefit, and then now we go, oh, it's not 2,200 anymore, it's 3,200.
I'm going
I'm
to
just
jump
trying
in here, because I don't want one councillor to monopolize everything here. But just because there's a population threshold doesn't guarantee any development in the future. They still have to go through the process of rezoning and the public process involved with it. There are no technically any guarantees. It just sets out a priority focus for financial reasons, for environmental reasons, for fiscal reasons, and it's outlined in the OCP. So just because there's a designation doesn't guarantee any development. It just opens the door for the possibility of consideration of that development, correct?
That is correct, yeah. That in the existing OCP policy regime, that is correct.
Yeah. Jonas, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, if I may, what I would add is that what's changed in this OCP and from the first readings is that the growth management approach has been made more fair. So instead of applying to specific properties, it applies to all of the future neighborhoods. And we're trying to strike that balance between strong growth management policies and also leaving an opportunity open for a council to honor those 25 or 22,500 agreements that were made in the previous OCP for limited development. So those benefits that the community has been enjoying, would have to be formalized through that process.
Well, that's what I wanted to hear.
Thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one more piece to that, and that is that in the last meeting with council, we did hear an interest in having that flexibility, but having strong growth management. And so some of those criteria, like it now says that flexibility doesn't happen until the 22,500 population has been surpassed, and that a number of policy documents have to be in place prior to considering that development. Those are some of the items that were put in there in response to a council desire or council expressed interest in having that be strong growth management. So that's something for discussion. This is our attempt to reflect what we heard, but it's
So that's for discussion, that policy's for discussion.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask council 1 or 2 questions because I want to make sure all of council has an opportunity to get some questions and we get to the more public information part with the public. Councillor Chappelle and then Councillor Kent's on deck.
Perfect. Thank you, Patty, through the chair. My question is also about the growth boundary. Our OCP focuses heavily on climate adaptation and mitigation. And I wonder about, and I know that, first of all, staff has done an amazing job at this document. It's a seminal document. I really appreciate all the work that's been done. The integration with the flood management plan, our climate adaptation and mitigation goals forces development into areas that are known for natural disasters, flooding, earthquake, liquefaction, so we're forcing densification. And I also wonder about with the growth management boundary and densification in areas that are prone to climate change and force the district into heavy and expensive mitigation and adaptation. why we would choose a growth boundary. I know that tool is used in very large communities. To use it in a rural community is unusual. So I wonder about the affordability of what it does to, it forces people to assemble land, which makes the community incredibly expensive because it drives property prices incredibly high within the growth management area. So I'm just wondering how staff has addressed the issue of containing growth to an area, forcing assembly, making it in an area where the climate hazards are more severe than further up, actually out of flood regions and actually less expensive areas to develop for the community, where we don't have to deal with sea level rise, diking, and mitigation, flood construction. So I'm curious about that.
So focus yeah, and there were a number of assumptions made there, so maybe just provide some clarification as well.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess first off, I just want to start by saying that there are so many trade-offs in crafting these policies, and your question highlights one of the real challenges that Squamish faces, which is that we do have so many areas that are threatened by flood hazards. In particular, that's one of the really big ones. And so I hear you, there certainly is an argument for saying, well, we should really go for those lands that are outside of the flood. What's that?
Head for the hills.
Head for the hills.
Head for the
yeah.
hills. That's
Totally.
exactly my point.
Yeah, totally. There's strong rationale for that. On the flip side, there are a bunch of other interests that we've heard expressed throughout the planning process, and we've tried to strike a balance in the end. There are things like we want to have infrastructure efficiency, so we do want the density to support our existing and any planned infrastructure. We want to make sure that it's well supported. We want to support that transit and alternative transportation infrastructure, and so that includes density. And we've got these heavy commitments to areas that are already in bad locations. So what we've tried to do, and actually I see David coming and just about to speak to it, which is great. We've tried to look at those areas that really do have the worst risk for the flood hazard and address those through the controlled densification areas and floodway DPAs, right. So that even though we are saying this is, if you want to speak to it, okay. So basically we're trying to say this is the area where we can get the best bang for our buck by developing. We know some of them are hazardous, so let's put on a layer that limits the densification that happens in those areas and minimizes the risk that people are going to be exposed to in those areas and transference of risk. And that's why we're so fortunate to have David have shepherded the integrated flood hazard management process, leading right up and dovetailing into this, because it's given us that ability to say, we've taken these areas, they're hazardous, we're going to limit what happens here, but within this boundary, this is where we want to continue to densify. And then on the flip side, growing into our highlands, which are, you're right, critical areas because they do provide growth outside of floodplains. Those are certainly areas that we do see as growth potential, but our idea is to sequence them so we get the maximum bang for our infill development buck and then go there when we need to. And so that's the idea of that tighter growth management boundary. It was actually something that was discussed. We had a broader boundary, but in discussion with council, we talked about really wanting to strengthen that infill, and that's where that tighter boundary came in from. I think at our last growth management meeting, that was the output from that. But again, coming back to what Councillor Pryor was talking to, there's always this desire to make sure that we do have that flexibility to adapt to extraordinary applications, and that's why we tried to provide that relief valve. I'm not sure if that answers your question. If there are
just on the affordability, the biggest concern that I have with growth containment boundaries is they drive prices crazy, and we're already struggling with affordability in our community. And with building in, and this looks like the flood hazard management plan to me, when this is like right directly in flood hazard management. So I just worry about being able to afford the land for regular residents. Building in a flood hazard management area means that you have to build up if you're building in those areas, or you assemble the land. So if you're, and we're already seeing that in our downtown, high assembly, all of 3rd Avenue got bought up. So I'm not sure if staff is aware of that, but all of 3rd Avenue has been bought up, and the prices were insane. And now that will dictate assembly of the entire downtown. And I know that's the goal, but the affordability issue is a great concern with containing.
Can we speak to, I agree, it's particularly hard when public and council, we don't understand what the current capacity within the containment boundary is. So if you could speak to what's currently capacity in terms of getting up to either 34,000 or 22,500, what 75% might need, maybe define that a little bit more. And even what's already been approved compared to what the housing stock we have, because just to understand the supply-demand side of what the growth management boundary may or may not mean. Is that fair to say, Councillor Scott?
I'm not, the population cap, I actually, I have less of a concern with population cap than the idea of building in a hazardous, in a geohazardous region.
Just speaking specifically to the affordable
Yeah. Yes,
question.
perfect. Yeah.
The supply-demand side of the equation.
Yes, so we've gone through that exercise when we were preparing for the growth management policies to look at what is the capacity in our existing neighborhoods, and there is significant capacity still, including in our downtown. There's 2 significant pieces of land that haven't been developed. In every single neighborhood except for probably Brackendale because of the higher flood hazard, there is significant capacity which shouldn't affect the supply or the demand, because there is, looking at the land, there should be lots of supply coming out to the market for the next 20 years,
Yes.
depending on our growth. And if our growth hits a higher threshold than what we see here, it's quite likely that in 5 years we will go through a similar process to look at, okay, here's what happened in the last 5 years, and how do we need to adjust our growth management policies. So it is a living document in that
Thank you.
sense.
That's good.
Yeah. Can I add?
Yeah, you're going to do this to me all night, aren't you? That's all right.
Please.
I think there's a couple things I just want to speak to on that too. One of the concerns about contemplating going to some of the higher land for affordability is that much of that land is actually quite challenging to develop because the topography and the rock in there. And so I can't say that we've done an analysis to say this is the cost differential, but it isn't necessarily move out of the floodplain and the development is inexpensive. There are significant costs to that development, and they're actually one of the reasons we've tried to set up the policy precursors is because there is some work that we really should do, like a steep slope development permit area for development in those lands. I think that's a real crux that we don't want to progress too much into that land, which could also be expensive and have some hazards associated with it. And yeah, just to follow up on some of our early analysis showed thousands of potential units in our existing growth management boundary that have been approved in rezoning, and then several thousand more that have been presented as possible or inquired about in the coming years could become online. So within our current growth management boundary, there certainly are thousands of units of possible development.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Schwab. Councillor Kent.
First off, I want to apologize for scaring the heck out of everybody by knocking the mic on the floor there, but I just wanted to see if you're all awake and listening. To Matt, you mentioned, first off, we know that Squamish Nation is a very large landowner in the valley, and you mentioned that there would be some input coming forward to them on their land use. Just kind of wondering when we might see that, because it could have a very wide and varied effect throughout the community to get that information in.
And might turn that to Sarah.
Mayor, through you to the question of working with Squamish Nation through phase 4. So for clarity, we have been engaging with the nation at a staff-to-staff level from the early stages of this planned development. We have more work ahead to sort of flesh out what joint planning might look like to provide a little bit more clarity around that. We know that there are lands that the nation holds, not only reserve lands but fee simple lands that are important to the nation for future community, economic, and cultural development. And so we need to figure out what joint planning looks like and how we will engage in future. Not all of those lands are lands that the nation might be looking to develop in the near term, but we do need to forge some understanding and some protocol around that. In the last several months, as council is aware, the nation has just gone through their own election, which has been tricky for us just to get staff time because their capacity is limited because of election items as well. So it's a priority for us following first reading. We're going to be working and doing our best to continue our conversations with Squamish.
Thanks, I look forward to seeing that.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. So our current OCP has a DP area guideline for multifamily development. The new OCP proposes universal guidelines, that's DP area 3 now in this new draft. Living in a multifamily development and seeing some of the conflicts arise and the livability of some of these developments that have been built in the past, what's the strategy for including this DPA guideline in a universal set of guidelines so it's combined with commercial and industrial? Are we at risk of losing some of the key livability goals that we're striving for by doing this, or I'm curious about why we've chosen this direction?
Yeah. So thank you for that question. Through you, Mayor Heinzman. I think one thing we recognized as staff working with the current development permit areas over the last number of years is that there was lots of room for improvement to our guidelines to ensure more livable multifamily development. And so a big focus of this set of development permit area guidelines was to address that issue. And when we began to craft them, what we found is that many of the guidelines that we were wanting to implement for the multifamily developments actually had applicability to other developments, commercial and industrial, in certain circumstances. And so we had to make a choice early on if we would split and replicate those guidelines across all the development permit areas, or if we would try and have a consolidated version. We actually began with split guidelines, and the advisory design panel, when we presented them with the first draft, found that the repetition wasn't desirable. They felt like they would like to see one set of guidelines that was easier to follow through in the different categories of areas that we were addressing. And so in our second version, we created that universal set, but because there are so many important guidelines that are specific to multifamily, throughout the document, throughout this universal set, we call out specific guidelines that are relevant to commercial, industrial, or multifamily in particular. And I think really it reflects that there are some great design practices that can help us raise the bar on design for all development in Squamish. And we want to apply that to everything. And then still we have an opportunity to integrate all of the additional design characteristics that can improve multifamily in a way that's coherent and is easy for the design community to use. So that was the evolution of the universal.
Anyone else?
I'm just going to excuse myself.
Maybe I would like to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. It is the first day of Hanukkah, and I know Councillor Chappelle has an evening planned with her family, and so we appreciate the fact she came out tonight, but I understand she does have to go.
I'm out. Thank you very much. Yeah, happy Hanukkah.
Thanks,
I didn't know
Susan.
you with my family at home.
Councillor Elliott?
Okay, so I'm page 93. Where am I? I'm in section 18 on the trail network. In section J, it says evaluate proposals for pedestrian crossing to the west side of the Squamish River. And I was sort of always the impression if you were clever enough to get there, you could enjoy that environment. But I sort of never imagined that we would start to open that up in the near term. So I'm curious whether this was community feedback or from our trails group or, yeah.
So, through you, Mayor Heinzman, that which page is that on? What's the?
93 of the OCP.
93 of the OCP. I don't have my agenda copy with this. It's section 18.6J.
Section 18.6J.
It's 115.
of the agenda.
Oh, yeah, here, I see, yeah. So there was actually a number of, I wouldn't say there wasn't a lot of input on this topic, but during the public engagement, there were several comments around it. There were some comments that were saying, we're interested. I think there were some people that indicated a lack of interest, or a desire to not have that access open. And during the time that we were working on the OCP, we actually had an inquiry from an applicant who was looking at some crown land in that area with the interest of potentially developing something to that side of the river, some kind of crossing. I did not go very far, but it had come up during the planning process. And so we felt that it might be worthwhile to put some policy in how we would address an application coming forward. I believe in discussion with BC Parks, they also suggested that it might be worth having some type of criteria for how we would contemplate or how we would consider an application if it were to come forward. Because as you know, BC Parks has parks on the other side which are popular recreation areas. So it wasn't that it was a response to, let's find a way to build a bridge to the other side. It was more, we may face one of these applications or an interest from some individual or some group, and we felt like it would be worthwhile taking, based on the process that we've gone through, considering the different values that would be relevant, and crafting some policy that would provide a discussion point or a starting point for discussion if that were to come forward. It wasn't intended as a policy to say, here's what we need to do to get a bridge across. It was more, here's what we would consider if something came forward. And it is a policy that is, open to discussion. If council does not want to see it there, it could be removed.
Thank you, Councillor Carr.
Yeah, thank you. And I really do like that, what Karen was just talking about, the livability guidelines. I mean, I really, really like those. And, when I read through this document, and I hope everybody reads it, staff really have done a wonderful job. This is, and watching you guys over the last 2 years and listening to it, and we go through numerous presentations of all sorts of food security and all these things, and it's all in here, and it's really impressive. And so on the food security one and the agricultural, and it's just because we've kind of got an update on that from somebody just recently, and we're supposed to be protecting land that's arable. So what about areas like Robin Road that aren't in that? Is there going to be wording in there to further protect, or do you think the wording in there about protecting arable lands is strong enough?
Yeah, Mayor, through you to Councillor Pryor's question. It's a great question. So we've incorporated, just to start, we've incorporated the Squamish Food Charter within the official community plan, and the main objectives around protecting and enhancing the agricultural land base within the community. Some of that land base that supports agriculture and food production is going to be within formal ALR, agricultural land reserve lands, but there's lots of opportunity to consider food production in other lands, and certainly we're talking about and promoting food production integrated within neighborhoods, within developments, within parks, so kind of reconsidering and reimagining how we might look at our parklands and providing opportunities for small, sort of intensive agriculture or urban ag. And one of the key policy tasks, if you will, following OCP adoption will be to look at more closely. We just completed, or are on the verge of having completed, an agricultural land use inventory. So we looked at farming activity within Squamish, but also within Area D. But one of the key tasks that we'll be undertaking is looking at zoning of agriculture lands that we have currently, trying to better align our zoning And also, I want to point out for council and the community, for the first time, that we actually have a land use designation devoted to agriculture as a standalone land use. Previously, agriculture uses were kind of nested within a limited use designation or resource, but we really want to highlight agricultural lands. So we've incorporated all the ALR lands within that agriculture designation, and there's an opportunity for future lands that are designated for agricultural uses to be added to that designation and zoned accordingly.
So is it fair to say, just to build on that, as we consider this a living document, it outlines some policy gaps or areas that we need to focus on? As we develop those policies, they can then become schedules of, for example, if we do an agricultural land plan with the SLRD, it can become a schedule of the OCP. So is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
That's another piece of the living document sort of story?
Yeah, incremental kind of
Iterative.
iterative improvements and adjustments, to capture those things.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Rice.
So just going back to the growth management section, 9.4C, we talk about completing sub-area plans as part of our annual budget process, and then we list a number of neighborhoods. But our experience in our term shows that there's more pressure in some neighborhoods in terms of densification, and I wonder if there's a benefit to putting some priority language in there so that this council and future councils are focusing on the neighborhoods that would benefit sooner from a sub-area plan.
Yep, go ahead.
Through Mayor Heinzman. Yeah, we don't have it there now, so we certainly could add it. We actually did list them at a staff level, what we thought were probably a loose approximation of the priority ranking. But you're right, it doesn't say that, so we would know. So we could add that as a policy in there.
Or it may be worth a bullet just to saying they will be prioritized based on immediate needs as opposed to, but it outlined that we should create a priority list.
Right, and I would suggest that's probably why we didn't say it outright, is because it was more us internal staff, contemplation without really robust consideration or vetting with council.
If I may just add to that,
Go ahead.
just the rationale for the list and the way we did it was based on infill potential. So the communities with the most infill potential would put at the top to kind of make sure that we have a plan before growth takes off.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you. In the present OCP, there are some properties designated as future residential, which have a population threshold of 22,500 on it. And in fact, in the last council term, there was an application by one of those property owners to have that threshold removed, which did not pass. But now in this proposed OCP, we have set out the growth management area, and we have raised the threshold for these, I'll call them adjacent lands, for lack of a better term, to 34,000, unless there is a significant community benefit and unless certain other things are met. So I'm wondering if the 22.5 is now a redundancy, or is there any value in maintaining that, or just saying to all of those lands that are outside the boundary, the threshold is 34, unless there's a significant public benefit.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Heinzman, this is it. We would be very interested in hearing council's perspective on this. This is a really challenging balancing act from a staff perspective in terms of drafting these policies. And really we're balancing that flexibility for council to consider these consider important applications against trying to have as strong growth management policy as possible. And you're right, with the threshold of 34,000, the threshold of 22,500, which is currently in place, could be seen as not important. And so removing that would then create a situation where council could consider an extraordinary benefit application immediately, but the threshold of 34,000 would still be in place. So that's a totally viable policy option and would still fit within the growth management, strong growth management policy. It just is not as strong as saying we won't consider it until 22,500. And that's where we were debating, and as I said, we're open to the input from council.
And the community, I mean.
And the community, yes.
We want to hear the community's feedback on that balancing act that we're trying to achieve.
Just to expand on what Matt has said, at the last council discussion, the 22.5 marker was, or threshold, it seemed like it was sort of a stepped approach, so that the council was considering and still maintaining a priority around infill, but recognizing that, you know, if we continue to grow between 2 and 3% per year, that could be as close as, you know, 5 years away. So, you know, I understand that it was, the discussion several months ago was really around highlighting that there is still that interest in infill and having sort of that stepped approach. But as Matt said, it's, you know, we're trying to strike that balance and really interested to understand whether it matters.
Councilor Pratt.
Well, on Councilor Lace's topic there, I heard you say that a person could apply if they had an extraordinary benefit. They could apply now.
That's not what he said. Go ahead.
Just to clarify, and it's an important point to clarify, the way the policy is drafted now, it says that there are a couple things that have to happen first. We don't consider the extraordinary benefit until the population reaches 22,500. So it's not available now. It's available when the population passes that first threshold. And it's not available until those policy precursors that we've discussed, some of these things that council had identified as being important to have done prior to considering development. It isn't available until those have been completed. And so those are items that are worth discussing.
Yeah. Okay, well, on that,
Yes.
I think that some of the precursors that you have, you know, like a wildfire plan, and, you know, a few of them on there, if someone decided or was moving forward with an application, they could do those on theirs. It wouldn't necessarily have to be up to City Hall to have policy in place, because, you know, what happens sometimes there when we say to someone, well, when we have this policy in place, you can go, and then it's not a priority for council, and it doesn't get done in that term or the next term, because it never becomes a priority. So I don't really like putting those. I wouldn't mind to see the development have to do some of those, you know, the ones that make sense for that development, but I wouldn't want to see all those, because then the 2,000 or 2,200 cap means nothing, because we could have 2,200 and we might not get those policy done for 5 years.
It's not 2,200. 22,500.
22,000. So anyway, I don't like those. And the reason I talk about this is because I was on the council that took that land out of residential. I voted to take it out until we had that population done. And I was on the growth strategy at the time, and Phil Boname, that does growth strategies for the province, was our guy, and he said, you wait until 22.5. And so when it came up to council, I fought for that number and actually turned that development down. Fast forward 5 years, the development's ready to come forward, and now we got a new cap and Kershaw standing in the way. I just feel like, you know, there are some things that you have to follow through in. If it's, you know, like, you know how people say, remember when it was Squamish was a place where development goes to die, right? You know, I'm not saying we're there, but I just feel as though we have to have some kind of conscience on things that we say in the past, because, you know, it's not kind of fair when we've actually our interaction with somebody. When there's something going on and we're working on it, and then all of a sudden we pull the rug out from under it and go. So So I don't know, I know the OCP doesn't talk about that, but I certainly hear staff doing a very, very solid job of keeping the door open, and I appreciate that. So, thank you.
Councillor Elliott, and I would like to wrap up. This is just the beginning of the next phase of the engagement, so Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, I think I might differ from my colleagues around keeping the 22,500 cap or not. Certainly, the feedback that I heard from the community was strong growth management policies, but trying to strike a balance for those extraordinary benefits to the community. And I remember early on, and why I think the policy precursors are really important, is that in our early growth management discussions, we had singled out specific properties. And council gave the direction to say, if we're going to do this extraordinary benefit, it needs to apply to all the neighborhoods that would be in future residential neighborhoods. Which means that as soon as this policy passes, if we lift that cap or don't have those policy precursors in there, we could get applications from any of the landowners that are sitting outside the growth management boundary. And one of the challenges of this council term has been rapid growth without the policy, good policy in place to manage that growth. And we've been playing catch up with policy pretty much since the beginning of our term with the help of our staff. So to me, having wildfire protection plans in place for the whole district and having a DPA for steep slopes and an evacuation plan for the whole district are vitally important before we start to open up new lands. And I'm really interested to hear what the community has to say about the balance that we've struck in this draft, because I think it's one of the major pieces that came back in the feedback from the community is managing growth for the future.
And that's certainly the feedback that we've even gotten through our budget survey process just of late. So it's a theme, definitely. I'm gonna maybe close it down to council at this point. I'd like to close the meeting and actually get to the more interactive part and have the community participate. And don't forget to make sure you're filling out your forms, get that feedback into us. This, if you've looked at the evolution of this over the last 2 years, it really has been informed by the public tremendously. So your input and your engagement is really valuable to the process, and council has been determined that this is a made in Squamish OCP. So please make sure you provide that comment. We look forward to it. And you would like to say something, Councillor Lee?
I would like to move first reading of the
Okay, I was going to get there. Thank you.
Second that.
Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Pryor, that we give first reading to the OCP bylaw. I will call the question. All those in favor? Would you like to speak to it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I thought you had. Okay. Sorry,
This
I
is
thought you
not the
had.
question period.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I wanted to make a comment.
Yeah,
No,
sometimes
thank you.
it's hard to distinguish that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, but this is actually a very important moment for our community, because the OCP, among other things, is our community vision. So I'm happy to support this. I would also just like to say that I know Matt and Sarah have done a wonderful job in this, and we're entering the final phase now, and so they might see the light at the end of the tunnel and they can get back to leading a normal life, because I know this has taken an awful lot of work over the last 2 years. And it has been almost 2 years, which seems like a long time, but for OCPs, in my experience, that's like light speed. The last one, I think, took 7 or 8 years. So this has been happening very quickly, and what we originally thought might be just a little tweak has kind of evolved into something that I think is very significant. So I'm happy to support this application.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just going to say this again, and I really do have to commend staff on this. This is award-winning, really. I'm 7 years sitting on council and 7 years listening to meetings, and it's really been an honor to have you guys bring this forward to us. It really has. So thank you.
Thank you. Why don't I go to all council members? Councillor Kent?
I don't know, it's been summed up quite nicely, but yes, thank you for your hard work. And I know it's taken a lot of time away from your families. But again, thank you.
Councillor.
I've been a member of the Community Advisory Committee as a council representative with Mayor Heinzman, and so I do want to give kudos to that committee, because they are the ones that have helped make this readable and accessible. They are the ones that provided guidance about producing executive summary, providing direction on setting goals that people could really relate to, and directing our engagement through this whole process. And they've been an invaluable part of this. I am so looking forward to seeing the feedback that comes in now that first reading's been put forward, and reflecting on the community's comments as we head towards second reading. But this is a great document. I'm really proud to see the draft that's before me.
Now, I'll just add my comments as well. I think the community deserves a huge kudos because the participation was robust. It was heartfelt. It was participatory. It was varied. So I think the community did a great job of showing up, but their job isn't done yet because this is really your opportunity to see what's been presented, what in theory could go forward to council, though I suspect there's going to be some tweaks based on input. Certainly from some of the written submissions we've been getting, that's sort of, there's always going to be, and we've talked about this a lot in terms of this document is never going to be perfect. You're never going to find a perfect document. I sort of, as a bit of a joke, sent Matt and Sarah an email last night. A friend had sent something about the Squamish Estuary Management Plan in 1982, and I actually have it on my computer. And in it, subsection 2.3, it says, "The town of Squamish is not and will not likely become a major focus for tourism or regional recreation." Now, this was 30 plus years ago, but it just shows you that you can crystal ball all you like, and you can ground truth for today, and we do our best to project into the future, but the future will bring what the future brings. But how this OCP differs from many communities is it really is multi-layered. Certainly the schedules and the mapping and the growth management are sort of the crux of the big community issues. But it's the foundational pieces about livability, about childcare, about affordability, about health, and integrating that whole health lens. And we've had a great partnership with Vancouver Coastal Health on creating those policies. Most communities don't have anywhere near the comprehensive vision that this OCP has outlined and articulated. And I mean, certainly Sarah and Matt deserve major kudos because they've been the ones assembling all this, authoring it, getting feedback. But it really is a group effort. And it's not over, so we really want your feedback on this. Appreciate everyone who came out tonight and anyone who may be listening, and look forward to more engagement as we move towards second reading. With that said, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? If any, motion carries. I'll entertain a motion to terminate, and then we'll be here talking about all these schedules. Please engage council, staff. Maybe I'll just have staff put their hands up just so if people want to know who to, those people and these people. But please come have conversations, fill out forms. The website is that interactive map is really interesting, and you can provide direct feedback on different land use designations. It's really an interesting tool. So please go on there, and thank you very much. Motion to terminate, Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, everybody.